Well, today we got some, I guess, good news. As we inch closer to the September launch of the new iPhone 15, and I say basically all new iPhone 15 because a couple of videos back, if you go back in my video history, we got leaks of what the new iPhone 15 Pro and iPhone 15 Ultra look like. It's basically, the more I see it and get used to it, the more I like it. If you know what the Apple Watch Ultra looks like, where it has the design, right? If you Google, you can Google. I have pictures, but iPhone 15, you'll see it. I'm talking about. But if you have an Apple Watch Ultra, or if you want to take a look at the Apple Watch Ultra, it takes on that same design, kind of rounded edges. It's got a raised display area. Anyways, good news today. And Apple's been trying to steal some of the shine from Samsung, which is fine. All companies do that with the new Galaxy release. There's been a bunch of leaks for iPhone 15 models coming out this last week. iPhone, the Pro series, so the iPhone 15 and the iPhone 15 Ultra are going to have and or include 8 gigabytes of RAM. Now, this is a huge step up in Apple's spec department, in the iPhone spec department. We all know, like with the MacBooks and stuff like that, they certainly don't short you out on specs and memory, storage, stuff like that. But iPhone has traditionally had very low specs when it comes to RAM. They just increased it from 4 gigs to 6 gigabytes of RAM as of just a year or two ago. So them stepping up, that's been one of the big knocks against Apple. If you compare the flagship Apple devices, the flagship iPhones, and you compare the flagship Android devices, iPhone competitors being OnePlus, Samsung Galaxy series, and Pixel, I have 20 gigabytes of RAM on my Samsung Galaxy S23. 20 gigabytes. That's more than most laptops. And I have 12 gigabytes of RAM on my Pixel 7 Pro. Android has had a base model, basically. Now you can find some with lower, but 8 gigabytes is the least amount of RAM I would use on a smartphone. This is huge news for Apple and all iPhone fans. Now, why is it such big news? Because for power users like myself, power users use a ton of apps all at once. If I went through my recent app on the S23 Ultra I'm recording on, you'll probably see anywhere from, 10 to 15, on some days possibly 20 apps open in the background. And when you are a power user, meaning you have apps open in the background that are power hungry, I have Canva, the software that I use to make my thumbnails for YouTube, a video editor, camera open, I have documents open, Google Sheets, Docs, Keep for my notes. All that stuff uses RAM, especially the video editors and photo editors. If you don't close them out, they're running in the background. And what your RAM does is it basically stores that memory for that application in the background, so it holds on to that RAM. The more apps you have open, the more RAM you are required to keep that app. If you have 15 apps open and let's say you have an iPhone 14 Pro with 6 gigs of RAM, let's say you want to open up another app to do something else. You want to open up a note-taking app to take some notes. Well, if you're bumped up against your 6 gigabytes of RAM, it's going to close out your oldest app that you have open. So basically, the first app that you opened, the oldest one, it'll clear out some of the apps in the background to make way for the app in the foreground. So the more RAM you have, the more apps you have open in the background, which makes for better multitasking, which is going to be, I know some power users for iPhone are rejoicing today because this is a huge step. The more RAM, the better. And I know some people say, oh, I don't need this much RAM, or you don't ever use that much RAM. True, but I do. I'm a power user. I have a ton of apps open. And plus, think about it. Think about your mother or somebody older that has a device and they never restart their phone. They never close out any apps in the background. That'll be good for those people as well. So this is a welcomed spec bump to the entire tech world, basically, or into the entire iPhone user base. Now, with the spec bump is, I was trying to remember what I was going to say. Another little piece of news that is tied to the RAM bump is going to be they are going to use LDDR5 RAM. Also, huge news. Samsung just released, Samsung with their S23 series, the Ultra, the Plus, they're using LDDR5 RAM. Everything else, now I think OnePlus 11 has DDR5 RAM. That's the newest spec of RAM. That's the fastest, newest specification of RAM. Some laptops don't even have that. Most laptops don't. Most devices don't. So it is new RAM. And why does that matter? It's faster. It can transfer memory faster to and from. So basically that goes back to multitasking. It'll be able to transfer RAM and memory much faster. I think it's maybe almost 5 times faster than LDDR4 RAM. So it's going to be a multitasking machine. Now, I guarantee you Apple's going to stay on 8 gigs of RAM for probably years, but that's fine. iPhone doesn't require as much RAM as Android devices. Android devices typically have more processes running in the background, and that's just how it's AOSP stock Android is coded. And then especially if you have a Samsung device, you got a ton of apps running in the background. You can use, like I was saying earlier in the video, I can use a device with 8 gigs of RAM. I just have to stay on top on an Android device. I just have to stay on top of the processes in the background. If I'm not using an app, I'll have to close it out. I have to be mindful. With 20 gigs of RAM on my phone, I don't have to do any of that. So this is huge news. I think 8 gigs of RAM will be perfect for Apple, at least for a few years. Maybe till like the iPhone 18, 19, or 20, they'll probably bump it up to 12 gigabytes of RAM. But huge news in the iPhone world, in the tech world. I know it's going to fly over a lot of people's radar, and that's fine. But for us tech enthusiasts, it is big news when Apple decides to bump up their RAM, because that would be a knock. A lot of people say, yeah, well, my Galaxy's way better than your iPhone. Y'all still only have 6 gigabytes of RAM. I have like 3 times that. I hear or see that online a lot. With the high refresh rate Android devices, and Apple still using 60 hertz on their base model. Now again, this 8 gig of RAM is only going to be on the Pro and Ultra model. And now they are going to put, so the base model iPhone 15, not the Pro, not the Ultra, will only have 6 gigabytes of RAM. However, they are upgrading that RAM to the LDDR5. So even the base model users will still see a minor improvement. So that's at least they're doing that. That's a good deal. So I'm very excited to see this. Apple's finally stepping up. I think they feel the pressure from these little comments and jabs online of people saying, yeah, well, your iPhone still doesn't compare to my Samsung or Pixel or OnePlus, whatever. And now they're slowly, year by year, eliminating those things. They just put high refresh rates on their Pro models, and I think the base model iPhone 15s are still going to have 60 hertz screen refresh rate. I believe so. But give them a couple years, eventually they'll bump up all their models to high refresh rate screens. They'll bump up all their models to, they'll probably, who knows if they stick with 6 gigs of RAM on the base model for the 16 and so on. But eventually they'll get there. And today we got another insight of them, stepping their game up. So I do have to take my hat off to Apple and say thank you from everybody in the tech world. It's about time you step your spec game up. Not that it was, really needed it, but it's just due. It's just due. You've been on 6 gigs of RAM for a while, so it's time. So thank you, Apple. I appreciate it. I speak for the tech world. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. We'll see you next time.